Greetings, loves. It is I, Tactical Girlfriend. Welcome back to the channel. I hope everybody's doing well. Today, I am simply going to talk about why I train, the things that inspire me to train, and some of the things that don't inspire me to train. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Now, when I talk about training, I'm specifically talking about becoming proficient with a firearm. And for me, firearms are first and foremost a tool for self-defense. That is what they're designed for. And in certain applications, I think they can be very effective in one's self-defense. It's not necessarily pragmatic in most defensive scenarios, and that's why I do encourage a plethora of different kinds of skills and mindsets and approaches to threat modeling. But I would much rather have a firearm and not need it than need it and not have it. So therefore, I would like to be pragmatic in my approach and be effective. And when it comes to training around firearms in a defensive capacity, I primarily do that because I want to be able to defend myself effectively if I ever need to, and furthermore, defend my loved ones, my friends, and my community. The world is an increasingly dangerous place in certain ways. The future is very uncertain, and again, I would just much rather have the peace of mind that I know how to defend myself with a firearm if I needed to, than not. Furthermore, I do think that one way or another, autonomy and power both are ultimately going to come from the barrel of a gun. That is what shapes our world, that is what shapes power, and it is also what shapes individual power and autonomy. So those things are worth defending for every individual out there, and a firearm can be an effective tool in your toolbox to secure that. Furthermore, armed minorities are harder to oppress. It just simply is true. It is historically true. There are numerous examples of minorities defending themselves with firearms effectively and also acting as a deterrence for oppressors. So as somebody who is at the intersection of multiple kinds of minority, I do take this seriously. There are hateful elements of society out there who do wish me harm, and I would like to be able to defend myself effectively against that. Am I seeking a fight here? Absolutely not. I'm extremely peaceful. But I really would rather not get into a situation where my life is in danger, where I could not defend myself effectively. Secondly, I train because I don't want to become a liability. I carry a gun pretty much every single time I go outside. And with that comes a lot of responsibility. If you are not a competent shooter and you get into a defensive scenario and wield a firearm in defense, there's probably a very likely chance that if you're out in public, you might accidentally hit the wrong target. You might accidentally hit an innocent bystander. That is absolutely not acceptable under any circumstances, and that's very tragic too. The stuff is very dark, but it is a very real reality that we need to grapple with if we are going to honestly and genuinely approach defense, and that needs to be considered. You definitely need to be at the very least competent, but you also need to be effective. Shootings are generally over in a matter of seconds, and every little fraction of a second can be the difference between life and death. So hedging your bets, never settling for good enough, because there is no such thing. You cannot control the conditions that you are in, will make a huge difference. I'm gonna always try to be the most effective shooter that I can, and I need to be able to call upon those skills subconsciously. I can't just let all that fly out the window the second that the pressure gets turned up. And shooting is a perishable skill. It simply is. So if I'm not staying on top of my training, I will eventually become that liability. And I need to know what I need to work on. I need to know my weaknesses. Through training, I can identify those weaknesses, have some homework, have some things that I know that I need work on, and work away at it. And lastly, that all gives me peace of mind in my capabilities. It's good to be able to carry a firearm confidently, knowing that you are at least doing the best that you can to hedge your bets if you ever were in a defensive scenario, heaven forbid. Another reason I train is so that I am familiar with my gear. I train with all sorts of gear, but I'm not a collector of gear. I simply get gear that is made for a purpose and a function in mind. I choose that gear, I commit to it, and then I train and train and train with it. I want to make sure that I can use all the gear that complements my defensive systems effectively and pretty subconsciously. That stuff I want to feel like a second skin to me. I don't want to have to think about gear, and you simply cannot buy the skills that comes with the gear to use the gear effectively. You got to train through it. So be sure that you're using your gear when you're training. I also train because it's an interesting skill and it provides a very fun challenge. I'm definitely wired in a way that maybe teeters on masochism in all aspects of my life, including training, but I really do like to challenge myself. I do like to see myself get better at the things I do, and I love to advance my skills. And furthermore, I love competitions for this reason. They do provide an environment where I can apply my shooting fundamentals and find really good, honest feedback just from doing that. It really informs a lot of the things I need to continue to work on and train for, and it constantly inspires me and motivates me to get better and better. Furthermore, competitions are really fun in general, and they can be a really good social event. I love going with my friends to competitions, love hanging out, and just doing a fun activity together like that. Also, it's, for me, tempting to game competition and get a race gun and a race rig, a belt setup and all of that. But I keep going back to just the same old gear that I rely on to defend my life with. And that includes my carry gun. I shoot my carry gun at pretty much every single competition I go to. And that's because I really want to run my gear through its paces again, under a high pressure environment, in unfamiliar territory, in courses that I've never ran before. And that really keeps me honest with my capabilities as well as how familiar I am with my gear. Like I mentioned before, it's really important to do that. Now, there's nothing wrong with running a competition rig at a competition, of course. A lot of people do it for good reason, and everyone's trying to use good gear to really maximize their skills and get the most out of it. But the more that you advance in shooting, in my experience, the less the gear matters. So for me, I generally just default to using all of the gear that I really like to rely on if I were to ever need it in a defensive situation. And that's what I run at competitions, just to make sure that I'm being honest with myself and my capabilities, both with shooting fundamentals as well as using my gear effectively in general. It also motivates me to pursue better fitness. Shooting can often be a very physically demanding activity, especially the way I do it. And so therefore, I have all the more reason to maintain my fitness. And honestly, since I've gotten more serious about training and shooting, I've become more physically fit, I've become very healthy, and yeah, I've generally been pretty healthy my entire life, but doubly so now, and I'm in some of the best shape I've ever been in my life, and that's really nice. And last but not least, I really want to be able to acquire skills, be familiar with them very intimately and thoroughly, and be able to pass that along to other people. I really like to teach. I like to empower other people with this kind of information in particular. It's why I do exactly what I'm doing right now. And I also teach people in person a lot. So I want to make sure that I am confident in my capability to teach by being confident in my abilities and skills that I'm trying to pass along to other people. It's also really important for me to know what I am actually qualified to speak on and what I am not. And the more that I learn, the more I learn that there are other things to learn. And so I don't try to pass things along that I'm just not qualified to. I try to pass along skills that I feel like I know thoroughly and I can confidently actually send people away from a lesson knowing that they can actually take all that home and apply it moving forward. And furthermore, I want to make sure that the information I am passing along is good, and that just simply comes with experience. So I train and train and train so I get those hard-learned lessons so other people don't have to learn them the hard way. And I also just want to set a good example for others. I want to make sure that I am capable in the skills, again, that I'm trying to pass along. I want to demonstrate those skills to people I'm trying to teach so that they know that I'm qualified, they can trust me as a source of information, and that they also understand that there are things that they can work up to. If I'm not an effective shooter and I'm teaching a shooting class and people see that, well, they probably won't be very inspired. But if I show them something to work towards, that's going to inspire them all the more to also get better and apply these lessons and continue to seek out more information. Now, with all that said, let me also talk about some things that specifically do not inspire me to train. First and foremost is treating guns as talismans.
Brother, what's that? What's that, brother?
Guns are tools, they have a function, they are a means to an end, and I don't think that they just magically ward off evil. They're not going to magically make you safer just because you own a gun. And that is the thing that a lot of firearm owners suffer from, that mentality. At a certain point, you know, if you're not effective with a firearm, you become more of a liability for having owned one, and that's a liability to yourself as well as everyone around you. So again, I want to keep those skills sharp. I do not want to become a liability, and I approach this very pragmatically. And therefore, I don't view shooting as a hobby, and that's not to say that it's not fun for me, but it is a very serious skill that I take very, very seriously. I'm also not a collector. I don't just buy things for the sake of having them, and I'm definitely not a tinkerer. And yeah, like I tinker with my guns to optimize my setup, but at a certain point I commit to my setups and I try to become familiar with that, and you can't be familiar with that if you're constantly cycling out gear and accessories. And so therefore, I want to be effective, and I want to commit to the gear that I'm using to defend my life with. And that is why I'm defensively oriented, first and foremost. I view these things as tools, and that is my primary concern, is how to use them effectively for the function of defense in mind. It's also really important for me to acknowledge that guns are pretty much made for one purpose, and that's for killing people. The guns, at least, that I carry are. Yes, there's hunting guns, there's competition guns, but I don't own those guns. I use guns that are only made to kill people, and that is a very heavy thing to say, but it is a thing that if you are defensively oriented, that is absolutely the implication, that if you were to get in a defensive shooting, you would be shooting to kill. And that is why you need to respect them. You need to understand the gravity that comes with that. You need to take this stuff very seriously because it is life or death. And that makes it all the more important to avoid conflict in the first place. I never want to kill a person, ever. And so therefore, I need to take that very seriously. I need to not treat these things like toys. Again, it's not a hobby. I'm not collecting them. I'm not tinkering with them. I am specifically using them as the absolute last line of defense in my life. And a lot of gun owners would probably benefit from being more honest about that, honestly. Furthermore, on the point of viewing firearms as tools and not toys, I do not try to justify my gear acquisition through training. It's a reductive logic. A lot of people do this. They look for an excuse to buy some min-max stuff with diminishing returns because they just want the newest fancy gadget. And it'd probably be good if they were just honest with themselves about it, but that's not what I'm about. I'm about committing to tools that I find are effective. And I don't buy fancy gear that I'm not going to train with often because that's going to be a waste. And so therefore, I don't try to use that reductive logic of acquiring gear and looking for justifications. I simply get gear because I have a need and purpose in mind, and I want to have those tools that are most effective that I can acquire. And lastly, I don't train to become a prepper. And I know everyone's going to have their own interpretation of what a prepper is. So this is very subjective, but in my mind, a lot of preppers are often over-preparing for very specific, unlikely scenarios that are not based in a grounded and realistic threat assessment. I, first and foremost, am defensively oriented with my handgun that I carry every single day. It is what I train with the most because any threat that I could potentially run into in the world out there is going to potentially be addressed with that. So I want to make sure that I'm being realistic about that. I want to be realistic about my threat profile. I don't want to get lost in the weeds with fantasy scenarios I've cooked up in my head to justify my purchases. And that being said, yes, I have a lot of gear. I try to keep it to a minimum, but I have, a battle belt, I have a plate carrier, I have a helmet, I have night vision, for crying out loud. So a lot of people will see that and just assume that I'm a prepper, but I don't necessarily want to mince words here. I think there is a distinction to make there, and it is that I specifically acquire that gear first and foremost because I want to be effective in pretty much any scenario, and at least have those tools at my disposal. And therefore, I want to prepare for an unknown future with unknown threats. And again, I'd rather have those capabilities. I'd rather have that know-how and the gear for the unknown. And that's just general preparation. That is not a hyper-specific, unlikely scenario that I've cooked up in my head. And I also do all that stuff because I want to get familiar with all of these matters so that I can pass this information along to other people, like I said before. There's a lot of people who face different threats from me on the day-to-day, right now, and I want to be able to help them out too. And further, they might have threats that they may see on the horizon that they need to get ready for. So again, a lot of that know-how is simply just acquired so that I can pass it along to other people. And a really good way to explain just why the hyper-specific prepper mindset for the future is not effective is, just look at COVID. Did anyone see that coming? No. The prepper community especially did not see that coming. Were they prepared for it? Absolutely not. They didn't do anything to help themselves generally against COVID. In fact, a lot of the prepping community, those who self-identify as preppers, are still in denial that COVID even exists to this day. So again, don't delude yourself. Make sure that you're being realistic in your threat assessments. It's okay to prepare for an unknown future, and it's okay to acquire skills so that you can pass them along to other people, but don't get in the weeds with this stuff. And so those are the reasons that inspire me to train, and some of the reasons that don't. And yeah, this is a very subjective video. This is not me telling you why you should train. These are just explanations for why I do what I do. And hopefully this was illuminating. Hopefully it gets some gears turning. Hopefully it makes you more critical as a shooter as well. And if you did find this video useful or enjoyable, please be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell too. Also, I would love to hear more reasons from other people why they train, so don't be shy, chime in the comments below. And as always, huge shout out to my Patreon supporters. You are the real MVPs, you keep this channel going, and I could not do any of this without you. I don't run ads on this channel, I don't generate revenue in any other way. I am simply just trying to, at best, break even with the resources that I pour into this channel, so everything that you can help with is really greatly appreciated. If you want to go help out, you can always go to patreon.com/tacticalgf. The biggest contributors are named at the end of the video. And that's a wrap. I really appreciate you all tuning in. Please be good to each other out there. And as always, please take care. Bye!